Oh, she went there. Trump as Jesus. In the public meeting, in front of the world's television cameras, surrounded by people nodding and stroking their chins. Donald Trump, self-confessed sex offender, serial criminal, multiple felon, massive liar, destroyer of democracy, hater of truth, contemptor, I've just invented a word, but I like it, of decency. He is being compared to Jesus in the White House. But
what if the most dangerous thing about a political figure isn't that they're unpredictable, but that we've stopped taking them seriously? Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.
I look at next week's events, and I find myself wondering, how bad can it get? And then I look at yesterday's events, and I need to remind myself that sometimes you have to take him seriously. The reason I mentioned Simon Marks is because he was sitting in that chair yesterday, the chair I just pointed at on the radio, which of course you can't see. He was sitting in that chair yesterday, and he spooked me.
And that is why this is, I think, in many ways, the biggest day in all of our lives, because none of us, of our generation, has lived in an era in which the American protective security blanket provided by NATO wasn't operative. And when the Prime Minister was questioned today about the future of NATO and American involvement in it, and absolutely restated his adherence to the core principles of NATO and the benefits of NATO, where he notably didn't go was explaining what NATO looks like if the Americans are out. And the Americans, in Donald Trump's own telling in those comments to the Daily Telegraph this morning, look like they're heading for the exit.
He treated Donald Trump's comments about NATO with great plausibility, whereas I had been looking at them only through the lens of him being a deranged liar. Donald Trump, not Simon Marks. Simon, for the record, is neither deranged nor a liar. And do listen to him from 4 o'clock today on LBC, if you haven't heard him in the presenter's chair before. I just pointed at another chair that you can't see, the one I'm currently sitting in. And if Simon does that, a commentator for whom I have the utmost respect and regard, if Simon does that, it changes how I think. There aren't many people in that category, but it makes me question the position that I've adopted, which is, oh, here we go, don't worry, it's just trumping. But of course, the more you think about it, the more Simon's plausibility position makes sense. I mean, depending upon what possible explanation for Donald Trump's depravity you prefer, leaving NATO would make sense. If he is in the pocket of Vladimir Putin as a consequence either of sort of fanboy sycophancy or compromat and blackmail or whatever it may be, it would be absolutely the best thing that Vladimir Putin could dream of, the United States to withdraw from NATO. If it is everything he does is simply to distract attention from the Epstein files, it would work. It would be a brilliant way to distract attention from the Epstein files. If he is, and the reason for this is probably Putin-shaped, but it might be something else, the white Christian nationalists who are so terrified of brown faces in Europe that they want to sort of usher in a fourth Reich of white supremacism, then leaving NATO and imperiling Europe and creating a space in which racist strongmen might thrive. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, but it's another reason why Donald Trump pulling the United States out of NATO might actually happen, might actually be plausible. Oh, by the way, if you think that I'm exaggerating about white Christian nationalists and the stranglehold they hold on Donald Trump and just how mad they all are, have a little listen to what happened in the Oval Office yesterday.
And Mr. President, no one has paid the price like you have paid the price. It almost cost you your life. You were betrayed and arrested and falsely accused. It's a familiar pattern that our Lord and Savior showed us. But it didn't end there for him, and it didn't end there for you.
The moment begins with something subtle, almost easy to overlook. James O'Brien is reflecting on recent events, and there's a shift in his tone. Not outrage, not mockery, but something far more unsettling, doubt. Because up until now, like many critics of Donald Trump, he's been filtering everything through one lens: exaggeration, chaos, unpredictability, the idea that it's all noise. But suddenly that comfort zone starts to collapse. Why? Because someone he deeply respects, a serious, measured voice, treats Trump's comments about NATO not as nonsense, but as plausible, real, possible. And that changes everything. Think about that for a second. The difference between dismissing something as ridiculous and realizing it might actually happen. That's the line where fear replaces amusement. Because if the United States, the backbone of NATO, even hints at stepping away, we're not talking about politics anymore. We're talking about global stability, security, the kind of structure most people have taken for granted their entire lives. And this is where O'Brien forces himself and the audience into an uncomfortable position. Stop laughing, start listening. Because even if you believe Trump is chaotic, inconsistent, or extreme, you can't afford to ignore the possibility that his words translate into real-world consequences.
Sometimes you have to look at the stuff that he says and he does as if he were a normal president. And that's why I want you to tell me what the United States pulling out of NATO would mean. That's all. So if you've got military experience, you'll be able to draw upon it. If you have studied this at school or at university, you can draw upon that. If, like me, you just desperately try every day to cobble together comprehension of big events and movements and possibilities, then you know what to do. What would it mean? And you can explain it either to PhD level or you can explain it to kindergarten level. I don't care what it is. I just think that we need to be really careful, and I thank Simon Marks for reminding me of this. We can't file everything under bonkers, even if he is bonkers. We can't file everything under sorry what pardon? I'll show you what I mean. Speaking of sorry what pardon, as in the President of the United States saying things that don't make sense anywhere on the planet that he inhabits. Here's one example.
The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. They must grab it and cherish it.
What is he talking about? He's channeling Kool and the Gang, I think, at that point in proceedings. And it doesn't really get any better as he nears the end of yesterday's bloviations.
They're the bully no longer. This is a true investment in your children and your grandchildren's future. The whole world is watching, and they can't leave the power, strength, and brilliance. They just can't believe what they're seeing. They leave it to your imagination, but they can't believe what they're seeing. The brilliance of the United States military. Tonight, every American can look forward to a day when we are finally free from the wickedness of Iranian aggression and the specter of nuclear blackmail. Because of the actions we have taken, we are on the cusp of ending Iran's sinister threat to America and the world. And I'll tell you, the world is watching. And when we do, when it's all over, the United States will be safer, stronger, more prosperous, and greater than it has ever been before.
Nuclear what now? Nuclear black belt? Did he say nuclear black belt? Did he say nuclear black belt? What did he say? I don't know if I can bear listening to the whole thing again, so I'll try and distill it down to that peculiar little dose of brain flatulence that came out of the mouth of the most powerful man on the planet, who is currently being compared to Jesus by his own advisors and closest team. I hate saying this to you. I think you expect better of me. I can't get into that story as a phone-in. Where would you even begin? How have people ended up comparing Donald Trump, the self-confessed sex offender and serial felon, to Jesus, the twice impeached man-child, to Jesus? My Christianity is, like most people's, very fluid. It comes and goes. Sometimes it disappears completely. Sometimes it feels of great and profound importance to me. But nothing makes me feel more protective of my Christianity or of Jesus, if you forgive me for sounding a little bit happy-clappy, than when people malign him and misuse him and his legacy in such a hideous way. Jesus was ultimately a sort of pacifist hippie, and to hear him being cited in comparison to a man who is, a hideous and monstrous sociopathic at the moment, a man responsible for the deaths of thousands of people. It just beggars belief, but I find it so incomprehensible and so inconceivable that I wouldn't even know what question to begin to ask. I suppose it would be about the nature of white evangelicalism in the United States of America, white Christian nationalism, and we'll probably do this when I get back from my holiday, have a better look at what that involves and what that means, because never does America feel further away from the United Kingdom than when you hear things like that. And it's not just one mad woman in the room. It's a room full of people nodding along and stroking their chins as she compares an objectively hideous man accused of crimes that I can't even say to you on the radio in the bits of the Epstein file that his own monstrous regime have deigned to release, possibly bits of it by accident, to compare him to Jesus Christ in any way, shape or form it's beyond belief, isn't it? It's utterly beyond belief. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. A painful divorce from NATO would leave Europe in peril and alliance facing collapse. 8 decades. NATO has weathered internal disputes. Good piece in the Telegraph today. Once again, the writers that are nowhere near their comment pages proving why it was once the finest newspaper in the world. NATO has weathered internal disputes, enemy plots and shooting wars in Bosnia, Kosovo and Afghanistan. But we cannot ignore, just because the mouth from which these words emerged is the mouth of a madman, he is a madman that can pull this trigger. He's a madman that can pull this lever. Donald Trump could take the United States out of NATO. I want you to tell me what that would mean. What would happen?
And once that mental shift happens, the conversation becomes a lot darker. Because now, instead of dismissing the idea of the U.S. leaving NATO, O'Brien starts exploring why it might actually make sense, not morally, not strategically for allies, but from Trump's perspective. And this is where the analysis turns sharp. He lays out possibilities, not as confirmed truths, but as uncomfortable theories that explain the pattern. Whether it's geopolitical alignment, internal distractions, or ideological influence, each explanation leads to the same chilling conclusion. There is a logic to it, and that's the part people don't want to confront. Because it's much easier to believe that decisions are random, chaotic, or irrational than to accept that they might follow a deliberate path, even if that path leads to instability. Then comes one of the most striking moments in the transcript. Inside the White House, a comparison is made, not quietly, not indirectly, but openly, confidently. Paula White draws a parallel between Trump and Jesus. And instead of resistance, there's agreement, nods, silence, acceptance. Now pause there, because this isn't just political loyalty anymore. This is something deeper. Something that blends power, belief, and identity in a way that reshapes how leaders are perceived. And O'Brien reacts exactly how many listeners would. Disbelief mixed with frustration, not just at the comparison itself, but at what it represents. A political culture where criticism becomes almost impossible, and where extreme narratives are not only tolerated, but reinforced. And that brings us back to the central tension of the entire exchange. You can think something sounds outrageous. You can even believe it's absurd. But if the people in power are treating it as real, then ignoring it might be the biggest mistake of all. Anyway, I want to know what you think. Was this a fair challenge, or was there something deeper going on? Drop your thoughts in the comments section, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a great time to do it because it really helps the channel grow. Thank you all for watching, and see you in the next one.